So I'm curious to know what you think about that. What are your thoughts? Anybody want to just throw out some opinions?
Fearless.
Fearless, uh-huh.
It'd be a lot of fun to be working under that man in that moment.
Yeah.
Moving.
What's that?
Moving.
Moving. Any? Yes.
Possessed.
Possessed. Well, he's known for grabbing a work by the throat. Every note he wants to grab it and embrace it. He's certainly doing that here. Are there any criticisms? Oh, that's good to see. I love it too. But he had his critics, and he was fiercely attacked by the New York press back in the '60s because of his conducting style, over the top, and I think back in the '60s it was considered even more over the top than it might be now because the culture has changed, times have changed, I think. But yeah, he had his critics, but there's no way he could have done anything less than that. It's just who he is. He had to be who he is, and it reminds me of what Craig around? It reminds me of what he was just saying about being yourself, and that wonderful quote from Martha Graham about not worrying about how good something is, but making sure it's who you are. And Bernstein was nothing if not himself. That's just who he is. He couldn't help but interpret something like that in that way. That's just how he was. I have another one as well, Shostakovich, Fifth as well. We're going to talk about in a moment. But I just wanted to start with that because, and also we've already been talking a lot about the faces. I mean, what I love is his face. It's not just that he's doing so much with his body, and he's been through this huge workout, and he's sweating, and he's given everything he can give. At the end of this symphony, he's spent. But also his face is showing the passion and the pathos and the joy and the tension and those dominant chords that Mahler loves so much. That sustained dominant seventh that takes forever to resolve. It's not just a dominant seventh. It's this sort of yearning, this unsatisfied sense of yearning that Mahler's after, and that Bernstein shows so well in the face. It's not just joy, but there's also this human, this sort of sense that when you're having your best day of your life, you still feel like you can't be satisfied because we still feel like human beings. And we still don't feel like we've got paradise, even on our best day. Like there's got to be something. I don't know if you've had that on your best days. You have that sort of sense of yearning. To me, he shows that kind of thing in the face. And so I just think it's great to start with that, just to sort of kick off our topic here. I'm talking about passion, and I want to make a distinction between passion and enthusiasm. I mean, in a way, what you just saw was outward enthusiasm as well, and that's all wonderful too, but I'm talking about the inner passion that not only drives a conductor to show that much of himself, of his soul, to all those players, to get and inspire them to play as well as they do, but the inner passion that drives him to do the work necessary to internalize all of that. All of the music, all the technical parts, and then make it his own. That inner passion. We all know this outward passion of Bernstein. And those of you who are younger, you've seen it in videos as well. You didn't have to be alive when he was around doing this. But I want to just share this little letter from Lucas Foss, and this shows another side of Bernstein, the side we don't see on television. Bernstein was doing a rehearsal of Foss's Baroque variations for orchestra. This is quite a while back, before Bernstein was the huge success he is now. He called me up at 11 at night and said, "Lucas, I don't understand your music anymore." And by the way, they both lived in New York, just a few blocks from each other. Everybody was a few blocks from each other. "Can you come over here and explain it to me?" So I went over to Lenny's place, took my score, and we worked together until 2 in the morning. Now, Lenny had a rehearsal the following morning, and he came in with some 30 pages of notes, which he had written out about how he was going to rehearse the piece. He must not have gone to bed, because he did all this after Lucas left at 2 a.m. He wrote these 30 pages of notes. So he must not have gone to bed. He had actually taken the trouble to write down how he was going to rehearse the piece. He knew just how to rehearse it. He got amazing results from the players. I remember he turned to them at one point and said, "Did you hear that? Do you hear the sound you just made? Do you realize you're the first people who have ever made this sound?" Well, the orchestra took wings. What Lenny invested into other people's music, his colleagues' music, was extraordinary. There was a complete unselfishness in the way he did this. So that's the other side. That's that Leonard Bernstein all by himself, staying up all night just to make this rehearsal. And this was not the New York Phil. This was the orchestra he had before, like the New York City Orchestra. He had the smaller orchestra before he took over New York Phil. So that's what I'm talking about. That inner passion is what I'm talking about. And so how do we do that? How do we keep passion at a high level in our rehearsals and in our concerts? And so I've just got a few thoughts up here on the board that just reflections of my own on this topic. And these also apply, many of these apply to composers as well. In fact, just about all of them, except don't conduct an ensemble. But the others do, and I'll talk about how they apply to composers. Predictability versus surprise. As composers, we're constantly balancing that. We're constantly balancing a sort of a sense of inevitability that I talked about, and a sense that the audience kind of knows what the piece, they know there's enough predictability that the audience gets a sense of the personality of the piece, of a piece of music. They understand what it's about. But then also, the best pieces usually they're seasoned with these occasional surprises along the journey. Constant little surprises. So that you may have a map and know where you're going, but you just take a side road every now and then. And you go off and, you discover this little pond off on the side road or this beautiful landscape. And then you get back on the main road to wherever you're going. Music has to do that. And for my money, Mozart was one of the great masters of it, because he composed during a time when there was this common practice, sonata form and sort of tonal expectations that were just hard and fast. And yet, if you look at, I teach a class, an evolution of sonata form, and we look at Mozart sonatas, and virtually everyone after Mozart as well, and none of them are textbook sonata form. That sort of textbook theme in the tonic, contrasting theme at the dominant, or if it's minor, it's in the relative major, and then the development, where they just argue, and then the recap. Almost never does Mozart just do that. He's always got a few things, like an unpredictable modulation in the recap. They often will happen. Sometimes the recap itself will have a funky little tonicization before it goes back to the home key. Or a new theme appearing that hadn't appeared before in the exposition. Then, of course, Beethoven was famous for that, his E minor theme in the Eroica. Afterwards, the Eroica, the first one was in E flat major, and you all know you all know that theme? That theme. That theme never appears in the exposition of and it just shows up in the middle of the development. It's not, and as I said, Mozart was already doing that kind of thing as well. But what makes this unusual is that it showed up in E minor in a symphony that's in the key of E flat major. It's such a distant key. That was shocking as well. So those kinds of surprises. And again, as I said, Mozart was a real master at that, just peppering it with these wonderful surprises. Like seasoning. Bill Bolcom used to talk to me about that. He was my private teacher, one of my private teachers at Michigan. And he talked about that very issue of knowing how many surprises are too many. At what point do you surprise the listener so much that the listener just starts expecting surprises all the time and then is no longer surprised by them? They no longer mean anything. So how many surprises become too many? It's something we're always grappling with. And how many are not enough? And so then the piece is, I'm being led too much by the hand. I don't have enough to keep my interest and enough sense of surprise. So we're constantly dealing with that. And I think conductors have to think about this as well in your own way. And that is similar to what I'm talking about. Rehearsals have a certain amount of routine. There's a certain sense that as players come in with expectations. They expect certain things to happen. It sort of gives them a sense of comfort. And they have to be in a safe environment for one thing. And they expect that. They're in an environment where they're rehearsing, and they have to be okay. It has to be okay to make mistakes in the rehearsal. And so there's a level of comfort and relaxed environment that you want to create in rehearsals. But I think it's also important to season your rehearsals with the occasional surprises and concerts as well. Surprises can happen in concerts as well. Things that never happen in rehearsal that happen, those magic moments that can happen in a concert. That I remember when I was a trumpet player in Michigan, we did this, just the whole suite that you're doing, the whole suite in E flat. And we were in Florence at the Maggio Musicale in Italy. And it was just, the concert was going just, how many times have we done the whole suite? For, all our lives we've done that. We've done it so many times. And so it was very much business as usual. But then something happened at the climax, the climactic variation near the end. And Larry Wackliff, who was the conductor, he just stretched the retard a little bit more than usual. And he had never done that before. And believe me, Larry's never met a retard that he doesn't love. He loves retards. But even more than he had in rehearsals, he stretched this retard. And we went with it, and something happened. Something magical happened. And I was just, one of those moments where the hair was standing up. And at intermission, I was just sort of in shock. And I thought this has to be just me. It was just me. But I'm backstage, and everybody else has just got this sort of that headlight look, and nobody's saying much, and then finally someone said, did something happen? And then everybody just sort of exploded. Yes, everybody felt the same thing. Those magic moments that you can't plan. You want to look for leave those opportunities open. But in rehearsals, how do you keep an element of surprise? Well, of course, you could just stop doing whatever you're doing and suddenly pull out a piece to sight read. You could. Maybe you're rehearsing a lyrical piece, like Ye Banks and Braes O Bonnie Doon, and it's getting really dull. The students are they're just checking it in. They've rehearsed this piece maybe too much. Maybe you've peaked with it and you need to do something. Well, why don't maybe just take away all the sustain value from it, just to hear what it sounds like with no sustain. So everybody's just doing their attack points, and it gets very cuckoo clock, Everything's like that now, and there's no lyricism, there's no musicianship now, but they're hearing it in a different way, and they might notice, I'm not quite together with these guys on the other side of the band. Now they hear it going, ka-tum, 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 that kind of, maybe something like that. They might hear something that they hadn't heard before. So something like that. And of course, rehearsing backwards through a piece, you all know that trick, I'm sure. It's a wonderful way to rehearse, because you keep going, you keep reinforcing what you just rehearsed by rehearsing backwards. You back up and you go into what you just rehearsed. Then you back up farther, you go into what you just rehearsed that time. And then you're at the beginning of the piece, and psychologically it's okay to read through the whole piece now, right? Because if you rehearse forward and you get to the end, and you say, okay, now let's read through the whole piece, and everybody moans and they turn the pages back to page one. So psychologically that can be fun also to rehearse backwards. I'm sure, again, I'm not being a conductor. I don't have as many of these strategies as I bet someone like Craig would have, and in fact many of you would have. So I'm just curious, do you have other things you do to keep the element of surprise present?
Yeah, I think just what you mentioned is really important, because it sets up a different kind of expectation. Because normally, started being in the wilderness kind of business was new.
Right.
So I think that inside-out rehearsal is really important.
And again, just like for composing, if you do have too many surprises, then you don't have enough structure in the rehearsal, and they end up being counterproductive. Dick, are there any strategies you use to?
Only some I stole from Craig when I was there, like having people chuck that aren't playing, so they're still in the rhythm of the piece.
Ah, yeah.
Things like that.
Good. Yeah. Good.
Disguise repetition.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's one issue. When to sacrifice technical progress? I think this is really important, actually. I believe it's really important that that sometimes you sacrifice technical progress in a rehearsal if your, I don't want to say obsession, if your attention to details is hindering inspiration. I mean, said another way, don't fix things just for the sake of fixing them. And don't fix things when they are hindering inspiration. Because your main job as a conductor in rehearsals, I think the main job is not to fix things. The main job is to keep the players inspired. And along the way, yes, you fix things. But when it gets in the way, you need to sometimes just let it stay out of tune. Don't sit there and waste rehearsal time trying to get a perfect fifth, perfectly in tune. After maybe you've spent 90 seconds on that, I think already that's too much time. If you spent 90 seconds trying to get a fifth in tune, you're done. You're already over time. You need to go on because the players are all sitting there waiting for that. I think that's really important. And it reminds me, you know, I had this appointment with a doctor, an ear doctor. My ears are fine, but just check out. And he's a really good doctor in LA. And during my appointment, we struck up a conversation about music. And he mentioned to me that he was a music major in Texas. We're in LA, but it was in Texas. And he was a music major at a university in Texas. And I won't mention the university because he didn't have good things to say. He said, I was a euphonium major, and I thought I was going to be I wanted to be a conductor. And I was in my freshman year, and in the rehearsals, the conductor spent half the time tuning us, and the other half the time just browbeating us. And I thought, if this is what it means to be a music major, I'm getting out of this. And I went away, and of course he's a very successful doctor. Things have worked out fine for him. And I said to him, and I said just that. Well, I said, things have turned out okay for you after all. Maybe it's all for the better. And he said, no, but I think I should have been a musician. Despite his success, he feels like he missed something. So it got me thinking a lot about how many other people might have been turned off by maybe a well-meaning conductor who was obsessed with that technical perfection at the cost of inspiration. So, I don't know, think about that. If you feel like you're losing them, I think that's something really important. And tuning at the beginning, I don't know why, this is off the subject, but I think maybe it's a lot, it's in the South more than it is up here, but this whole business of tuning at the beginning, spending all this time tuning at the beginning of rehearsal, and then now we're done tuning. I think that's really a waste of time. And it teaches the students that now that we've done all this, now we're in tune, rather than the much more elevated way of thinking of tuning is something that never stops. It's a constant thing in a rehearsal. It never stops. And the primary responsibility is on the player, not someone or something. You know, the students are taught too young to rely on this thing or this other person to get them in tune rather than self-direct. And I know young students need some help at first. I know that. That's certainly the case. But as early on as possible, they need to start understanding that it's a constant thing that they're doing with their neighbors. You know, that constant adjustment that we do as mature players. Anyway, that was a distraction. I didn't want to get too much into that. But I just think it's important that we be careful about techniques, not fixing things just for the sake of fixing it. One more story. I just had my first job interview was at Lehigh University. I was still a student at Michigan. This is back in the 80s. And the job was to teach theory and comp, but also conduct the band there. And the interview went pretty well. I was really nervous, but despite my nerves, it went pretty well until I got to the band rehearsal that I had to do. And a search committee member pulled me aside and said, Frank, we don't want to just see you conduct. We want to see you rehearse and get really involved in details. We want to see you be very demanding. And so it completely threw me off my game. And I did exactly what this search committee member asked for, and I lost him in 5 minutes. Lost the whole ensemble because I did exactly what he said. I got very picky and demanding. Measure 1 and then measure 1 and 2, and I just stopped and started, and I insisted on everything being just right, and I completely lost them. And I didn't get that job, and I didn't deserve that job because I failed to do the most important thing that a conductor should do, which is to keep the players inspired. So I learned my lesson the hard way in that job interview. The person who got it is Jung Ho Pak. Anybody know Jung Ho Pak? Yes? Yes, he's kind of he does interlocking. He does the orchestra interlocking. He's great. He was much better than I could have been anyway. don't conduct an ensemble. And of course what I mean is don't conduct the entire ensemble. And it seems like such an obvious thing to me, but everywhere I go, it's one of the biggest flaws I see among conductors, especially band directors. They conduct a band instead of conducting individuals. And even in climactic moments, it's not just where you have solos happening, but even in climactic moments, you don't have to conduct the whole ensemble the whole time in a climax. As Craig was pointing out, I think it was the whole suite, or it was somewhere where there was a timpani, there was a cymbal crash, and they want you there. And sometimes in a climax even, you can be with one person in the percussion section. Or maybe the horns, the climax of My Amazing Grace. The horns have this da-da-da-da-da. They got a minor seventh. You can just be with them. Let them conquer the world right there, even though the whole band's playing. And right before them, the trombones have these triplets. Ba, 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 ba. You can be with them, then you can go to the horns. So even in big climaxes, you can be with individuals. Staying on the subject of Amazing Grace, a lot of people who have trouble with the middle section of Amazing Grace are failing to do that very thing. They're failing to conduct individuals. You all know the middle section of Amazing Grace, where it's all these independent entrances. The people who have the most trouble with that are the ones who are just sitting there. Da, 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 and and then there's this entrance, and they're not being with the different entrances of the ensemble, sort of moving around the room. I think it's important that by the time you finish a piece of music that you make eye contact with virtually everyone in your ensemble. Certainly by the end of a rehearsal, you should have made intimate eye contact. Not just look at them, but make sure they saw you looking at them. So you have to encourage the players to look more often as well. And it's not just to be touchy-feely. I'm talking about the music demanding this of you. If it's good music, the music demands this of you. If it's not good music, it may not. But if you're doing real music, it demands that you make eye contact with everyone during the course of the piece, or just about everyone. Maybe not every individual, but maybe this group, the first flutes, you've looked at them, and the second clarinets that you sort of made eye contact with at least every small group, if not every individual. As you know, as a player, when someone looks at you, it means something to you. It validates your sense of importance at this moment. And the next rehearsal, when that moment comes, you're going to play it even better, because you predict that conductor is going to look at you maybe again. And if he doesn't, oh, he didn't look at me there. He didn't notice it. I played it better and he didn't notice it that time. But if he does notice, or she does notice it, then you want to keep getting better every time you come to that spot, because you're hungry for that acknowledgement again and again. I think that's really important. And band directors don't do enough of that. They conduct a band too often. I've seen orchestra conductors are constantly right there with the first violins. Here's the whole orchestra. Bam! They don't mind turning their back to the whole orchestra. They're fine without them. They're just like that. So you're the orchestra and I'm here. It's okay if you don't want to do this the whole concert, of course. But every now and then they'll be fine without you. It's okay to turn every now and then and not be right there and have to do that or something like that. I see you, but I don't want to turn this way. But it's okay to move around. You don't have to feel restricted. Just face the front only and face the large body of people. I think that's really important. It seems so obvious, and maybe all of you think it's obvious, but I see it everywhere I go. Not just in this country, but all around the world. Wind conductors, especially. Okay. Yes. Well, this last one is, to me, the most fascinating of all. As conductors, we're always doing three things. I mean, there's probably more, but it can kind of be distilled down to three things, and that is imagining the sounds that we want to hear, listening to the sounds coming out of the ensemble, and then finally, the third thing, reacting to those sounds. And it's that third thing that most interests me. Not just reacting, but how we react. And there are many ways to do it. We've seen again already Craig, when he was showing a few spots, and I think you were asking for more from the horns in one spot in the Holst, and then the trombones later, and they didn't give him enough. First, he was showing them exactly what he wanted. They either didn't look up and see him, or they just were too, or their chops are just wasted because their band are not trombonists anymore. I mean, hey, my chops are wasted too, so believe me, I can say that. I can completely empathize. But when he didn't get enough, after the fact, they're done, their horns are down, and he went like that. So that the next time you get to that, you bet they're going to play more. You know, after the fact, he reacted. And so and he didn't have to stop and say, trombones, I want more there. He kept going. Everybody's playing it. After they're done, he did that. And they got the message. You don't have to stop, in other words. So anyway, there are 4 ways we react. The 4 ways we communicate. One is non-verbally, while we're just still conducting, as I was just explaining there. And you can do it in so many ways. Just a smile, or a grimace, or that. Any number of ways that we can react non-verbally. You can also speak, although this can be dangerous. But sometimes you can also talk without stopping. The English conductor was really good at this. I've seen videos of him. Sir Thomas Beecham, yeah, it was Beecham. He'd just sit in his chair, you know, in his stool, and wonderful violins, wonderful shot, wonderful shot. And just talk to them all, and never stop. He would never stop. And you can do that. Sometimes it's dangerous because players. If it's a really difficult piece with maybe multiple meters, and you're speaking to the players, even if they're not playing, they're sitting there going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Shut up! Will you shut up? I got to count these rests and come in. Don't talk to me. Sometimes the players don't want that. But take another situation. Maybe it's something where the meters, they know the piece fairly well, and the meters